Shabbat Shalom. Those of you that were with us when we were celebrating our 70th anniversary and who stayed right up until the end may have noticed one of the more unusual ways of encouraging additional promises of donation. Daniel Weiss, who was the organizer and sort of overall host for the evening, had a way of trying to explain different things that donations might cover. This amount could cover a teacher's salary. This amount might help pay off our utilities for a month. Such and such would then encourage people to make a pledge. I'll pledge to cover that much in order that it will cover that additional area. It may not be familiar to you unless you have been reading the Torah portion, which has it in a slightly different way, but I think you'll find it quite familiar. In this week's Torah portion of Bechukotai, near the very end, we have a set of nadarim, of vows, sorry, trying to get stuck between languages. A set of vows that are particularly pegged to a certain value. Now, you get to choose the value, but it is the value of something that it is equivalent to. Let me give you the example. You can say, I would make a vow to the service, that is to say, to the Mishkan in the desert, to the Temple of Jerusalem later on. I make a vow equivalent to the value of this field. Now, it doesn't have to be your field. It can be anybody's field. You're not actually giving the field. You are giving an amount equal to the actual sticker tag, price tag of that field. Then what happens? Well, the Kohen comes out, the priest, and he assesses the value of that field, and then that is how much you have to pay. So if he says the field is worth 100 shekels, you give 100 shekels, 75 shekels, you give 75, and so on. Now, key to this is you don't know what the valuation is going to be before the Kohen comes out. So you can say, I will give the valuation of my prize-winning spaniel to the temple, and the Kohen could come out and say, 25 bucks. And perhaps you might be happy with that because it is low. Perhaps you might be unhappy with it because it is insulting to your prize-winning spaniel. Perhaps the temple was hoping for a larger amount. Perhaps the temple is happy with what they are getting for what is, after all, a dog. In fact, the Torah makes it very clear in one of Eden's favorite phrases that she was learning to chant, that you have to pay, no matter what the Kohen estimates as the value, bein tov uvein ra, whether it is good or whether it is bad. Now, how do we understand that phrase? We can understand it generically, as I've explained, that regardless of what the valuation is, high or low, that is what you pay. And indeed, many translations take that route. But as I always say, any translation that removes something that is difficult to understand is not doing you any service, because it is removing something that should force you to struggle a little bit. It is trying to pre-digest the Torah for you, and that's not really its place. Instead, whether it is good or whether it is bad forces us to try and reflect a little bit. Who's good and who's bad? Whether it is a good valuation for me, meaning I am happy with the valuation, whether it is a good valuation for me, meaning I can afford the valuation, whether it is a bad valuation, too expensive for me, or a bad valuation, not enough and I feel insulted, or I feel like I have not given a big enough pledge to the community. And likewise, is it good or bad for the congregation? They're stuck with this mangy cow or dog, and they're not getting much out of it, and they wish they could have gotten more because there was a lot of things that needed more donation. Who is the good and who is the bad? Well, ultimately, by saying whether it is good or whether it is bad, the Torah is actually trying to tell us to let go of those particular adjectives when it comes to making a vow. Because a vow is meant to cut the moorings between what is good and bad. A vow is meant to be an open promise, not completely a blank check. After all, you are pointing to a particular field, a particular animal, a particular other object. You are pointing to something which will have some sort of brackets of what the range might be, but you are letting the chips fall where they will. You are saying, I wish to make a vow, and I am not going to worry about how good or how bad the final number turns out to be. Instead, I am making this openly. I'm opening up my heart to this particular moment. And I am saying, I do not have control over what happens next. That is an incredibly powerful statement, and one that we often recoil from in the modern world. Nowadays, we like to hem everything in with contracts and litigation. We want to make sure that we've got all the fine print worked out. We have to keep the lawyers employed after all. But are we ever allowing ourselves to have that moment of emptiness, that moment of saying, you know, good or bad, I'm stepping forward, and come what may, I will complete this promise. It is a fundamental difference. If you can imagine somebody making a vow to a friend, to a child, I vow to pay $10,000 to help you make a down payment on a house. Very generous, nothing to sneer at, very nice. But imagine instead saying, I vow that I will do everything in my power to get you into a house regardless. Bein tov ubein ra. Whether it is good, whether it is bad, I will do what I can to help you find a home. It's a very different second statement, isn't it? The first one, by its limited nature, even as generous as it can be, is still saying there's a limit to how much I'm prepared to do. The second one, more open-ended, says my commitment to you is to the fullest extent of my abilities, and what happens will happen. And I will be there with you, doing what I can when it happens. We need more times to make that kind of vow. We need more times to open ourselves up to the potential of the future being different than we expected, but to stand behind our promise as the future continues to unfold in front of us and between you and whomever you have made that promise to. Of course, Judaism does not encourage reckless vowing. There's a whole service called Kol Nidre at the beginning of Yom Kippur, where we try to remind ourselves that we do not make reckless vows and oaths. But that does not mean we make no promises to one another. We must allow ourselves to be open. We must allow ourselves to freely step forward into the future with a little bit of blind trust. Blind trust that we will rise to the challenge, that the person to whom we are promising will indeed be worthy of that promise, and that together with the strength that God gives each of us, we will be able to make good on that promise. Trusting gives us strength. Trusting is not the act of someone naive. Trust and that kind of vow is the ultimate sign of bravery, the ultimate sign of commitment, the ultimate sign that we are together in this, come what may. Shabbat Shalom.